Welcome to 3-in-1, Scripture Insight, exploring Scripture, human nature, and the deeper questions of existence, hosted by Chang Du.
Imagine you're standing in the middle of a city where, the wealthiest, most educated, most elite people on Earth live.
Right, the absolute top of the food chain.
Exactly. You'd probably think these pillars of society would be the absolute epitome of grace and reason and, well, nobility, right?
Yeah, you would assume so.
But now imagine those exact same supposedly noble people sneaking down to the local marketplace to hire literal street thugs, just paying off a mob of ruffians to start a violent citywide riot.
Which is just wild to picture.
It is, and all because a traveler came to town and just challenged their worldview.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the plot of some modern geopolitical thriller, honestly. But according to the materials we're looking at today, that is exactly what happened in the first century.
It really shatters our modern assumptions about what it actually means to be a person of high character. And that paradox is the exact mission of our deep dive today. We have an incredibly rich stack of sources for you to explore. We've got a mix of in-depth sermon notes, some cultural video scripts, and a highly detailed audio transcript.
It's a really great collection of materials.
It really is. And they are all centered around a specific, historically massive road trip taken by the Apostle Paul and his companion Silas.
Right, a journey that changed the world, really.
Yeah. And we are going to use their journey to decode an ancient mystery that is surprisingly highly relevant to you right now. Like, what exactly constitutes true nobility?
And to get to the bottom of this, we really have to look at the mechanics of this journey.
Right.
The sources map out Paul and Silas's route through ancient Greece, specifically their stops in Thessalonica, Athens, and Berea.
3 very different places.
Exactly. But this wasn't some casual first-century sightseeing tour. The texts emphasize that they were being guided strictly by the authority of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, they were on a very specific mission.
Right. They were moving from city to city, acting almost like a stress test on the ancient world. They were exposing the hidden psychological and spiritual machinery operating inside the people they met.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to look at that first stress test in Thessalonica.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge one.
It really is, because this is where we see that massive clash between the illusion of status and actual character.
Right. So Thessalonica was a major, thriving metropolis. And the Jewish population there genuinely believed they already possessed ultimate nobility.
Like they were at the top of the spiritual ladder.
Exactly. They viewed themselves as God's chosen people. In their minds, they held the absolute highest societal and spiritual status possible.
Because they had the texts and the history, right?
Yeah, they had the ancient texts, the rich heritage, the unbroken lineage. I mean, they were the definition of elite.
Hold on, I want to pause there for a second. If these people already believed they were God's chosen and, they knew the scriptures backward and forward, wouldn't they be the most receptive to a spiritual message?
You definitely think so.
Right. Like, why the intense, violent backlash when Paul shows up?
Well, that is the crucial psychological mechanism the sources highlight here. When your entire identity is tied to your status, to being the first or the chosen new information, isn't viewed as a revelation.
What is it viewed as, then?
It's viewed as a hostile threat.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Paul was introducing teachings about a crucified and resurrected Messiah that completely bypassed their elite gatekeeping. So they didn't respond with noble grace at all. They panicked.
And their panic led them straight to the gutter, basically.
Exactly. The sources point out the staggering irony here. These supposedly noble elites actually went down to the marketplace and gathered a mob of base fellows.
Like local gang members, essentially.
Yeah, literally just street ruffians. And they used them to spark a riot and run Paul out of town.
That's insane.
And we have to understand the historical context of the Roman Empire here, too. This is during the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
Right, Rome's big claim to fame.
Exactly. And the one thing the Roman Empire did not tolerate was a riot. If a city rioted, Rome would send legions to crush it.
Just absolutely wipe it out.
Yeah. So for these religious elites to risk the wrath of the entire Roman army just to silence one traveler, I mean, it shows how utterly desperate they were to protect their status.
Which is just a brilliant exposure of human hypocrisy. And Our audio transcript source makes an analogy to modern times that perfectly captures this.
Oh, the part about modern elites?
Yeah, it notes how we see this exact same dynamic today. We have supposedly noble people presidents, billionaires, prominent global figures who hold these massive worldly titles.
Right, the people we put on magazine covers.
Exactly. But when they feel their power threatened, or when they just give in to their base desires, they engage in incredibly dark, low-frequency, corrupt behavior.
Oh, yeah. Completely base-level stuff.
The source mentions, recent geopolitical scandals and wealthy elites retreating to private islands to hide their actions. And to be clear, the sources aren't taking political sides here at all. They're impartial.
Right. It's not a left or right issue.
Exactly. They're merely pointing out a universal human truth, which is that worldly titles and private jets mean absolutely nothing if your internal machinery is broken.
That's the perfect takeaway. The Thessalonians had the external title of chosen, but internally, their spiritual compass was entirely corrupted by their obsession with their own power.
They were just blind to anything else.
Yeah, they couldn't hear the truth because they were too busy guarding their own thrones.
So if inherited status and wealth don't equate to nobility, what's the natural alternative? You'd think it's brain power.
Right, human intellect.
Yeah. You'd think the smartest, most highly educated people in the room must be the most noble. So to test that theory, the sources take us away from the mobs of Thessalonica and straight into the absolute epicenter of ancient genius, Athens.
Yes. Paul moves to Athens, and specifically, the narrative drops us at the Areopagus.
Which is just a legendary spot.
It really is. Now, to understand the stakes here, we have to paint a picture of Athens. It wasn't just wealthy. It was culturally supreme. It was the absolute cradle of Greek logic and philosophy.
Like the home of Socrates and Plato.
Exactly. Aristotle, all of them. And at this specific time, the intellectual scene was dominated by two massive philosophical heavyweight groups, the Stoics and the Epicureans.
Wait, remind me, who exactly were the Epicureans and the Stoics? Because those terms get thrown around a lot today, but what did they actually believe back then?
Okay, so think of the Epicureans as ancient materialists. They believed that the universe was just random atoms colliding.
So no grand design or anything.
Right. They thought that if the gods existed at all, they were incredibly distant and didn't care about human affairs one bit. So their whole philosophy was about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain in the here and now.
Got it. And the Stoics.
The Stoics, on the other hand, were obsessed with pure logic, what they called the logos. They believed everything was determined by fate, that emotions were a weakness to be suppressed, and the divine was just this, impersonal force woven into nature.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, when Paul starts talking about a personal God who actually steps into human history, cares about our actions, and physically resurrects from the dead to these philosophers, that's not just wrong.
No, it's way worse than being wrong to them.
It's a complete category error. It literally computes as nonsense to both groups.
Precisely. To the Greeks, the Areopagus, which is this rocky outcropping right near the gleaming Acropolis, it was the supreme court of ideas.
Right.
The sources note that the Greeks spent all their time doing nothing but debating and listening to the latest philosophical novelties. It was like an intellectual sport to them.
But I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go for it.
Is demanding logic really a bad thing? The sources draw an analogy here, saying the Greeks were exactly like modern scientists who demand peer-reviewed, laboratory proof before they will believe in anything outside their immediate understanding.
Yeah, that's a very direct parallel they draw.
And honestly, that sounds incredibly rational. I like to think of their intellect like a massive, beautifully intricate clockwork mechanism. Everything has a gear. Everything makes sense.
That's a great analogy, but here is the problem with their clockwork. It looked beautiful, but it couldn't actually tell time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a closed loop. What's fascinating here is how Paul handles that exact mindset. He doesn't dismiss their intellect. He strategically uses their own gears against them.
How so?
Well, the texts note that Paul's spirit was provoked because the city was absolutely covered in idols, and one idol in particular caught his eye, an altar dedicated to the unknown God.
Yes, the ultimate theological insurance policy. The Greeks had engineered so many deities they were terrified of a blind spot. They basically built a monument to whoever we missed just to avoid getting cursed.
Yeah, just in case. And Paul uses that exact altar to completely dismantle their closed-loop philosophy. He stands on that rocky hill and delivers a brilliant, multi-point, logical argument.
Meeting them right on their level.
Right. Notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't start quoting Jewish scriptures because they wouldn't care. He starts with the cosmos.
That's so smart.
He explains the creator of the entire universe is too big to live in man-made temples. He argues that this God doesn't need human provisions or little statues. And crucially, he states that all of humanity shares one single origin.
So he's taking their logic and expanding it way past their limits.
He is dismantling their worldview piece by piece, proving that their intricate clockwork doesn't account for the actual reality of the universe.
But here's the tragic twist, right? Despite the absolute brilliance of Paul's argument, it doesn't spark a citywide revival.
No, it really doesn't.
The sources explain exactly why. Their intellectual pride acted as an impenetrable wall. Because the Greeks had elevated human logic to the level of a god, they couldn't handle mystery. When Paul brought up the resurrection, they literally openly mocked him.
And that gets to this psychological mechanism of intellectual arrogance. When you are a recognized expert in one thing, like the Athenians were with philosophy, it often gives you artificial confidence in everything else.
Yeah, you think you know it all.
Right? If they couldn't put Paul's message into a neat, perfectly logical box, they'd investigate it. They just threw it out. Their intellect actually became a barrier to truth.
So we have a serious problem here for our deep dive.
We do.
If having elite status and wealth like the Thessalonians doesn't make you noble, and having the peak world-class intellect of the Athenian philosophers doesn't make you noble, what actually does, where do we finally find true nobility?
Well, that brings us to the third major stop on this historical road trip, and the absolute core revelation of our deep dive.
Yeah.
A smaller town called Berea. This is where the source texts finally drop the true definition of what we could call spiritual nobility.
Yeah, the text explicitly praises the Bereans, stating that they were of more noble character than anyone else Paul had encountered.
More noble, not wealthier, not smarter.
Right. And the sources dig deeply into the mechanics of why. It wasn't because they had a higher GDP or more prestigious universities. It was because they received the message with what the text calls all readiness of mind.
That's a beautiful phrase.
It is. And I love that the sources look at the original Greek translation of this phrase. It literally translates to every willingness.
Every willingness. It speaks to a fundamental structural openness of spirit. But we need to be very precise here because being willing does not mean being gullible.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Bereans didn't just blindly nod their heads and accept whatever Paul said.
No, they weren't just passively soaking it in.
Exactly. But they also didn't argue just to prove how smart they were, like the Greeks did. Instead, they engaged in daily, diligent examination of the scriptures to verify the truth.
Daily examination.
Yeah. If we go back to our modern analogies, they were engaging in the ultimate form of spiritual peer review. They heard this wild new claim about reality, and instead of reacting with Thessalonian jealousy or Athenian mockery, they went straight to the lab.
I love that.
They unrolled the ancient scrolls every single day and said, let's see if the data actually supports this.
And our sources bring in a beautiful historical parallel to illustrate the extreme end of this exact mindset.
Oh, the Ethiopian eunuch.
Yes, they reference the story of the Ethiopian eunuch from another part of the texts. Here was a man who had immense worldly status. I mean, he was the treasurer for a queen.
So very high up.
Very high up. And he's sitting in his chariot out in the middle of a dusty wilderness, reading the ancient scroll of the prophet Isaiah.
Just reading out loud to himself.
Right. And when someone asks him if he understands what he's reading, he openly admits that he has absolutely no clue. He's completely lost.
Which takes a lot of humility for a guy in his position.
Absolutely. But the narrative shows that God honors him anyway. Why? Because of his genuine eagerness. Because he possessed the every willingness to seek the truth, even when his baseline intellectual understanding was at zero.
He didn't let his lack of comprehension stop his pursuit. He didn't say, well, I don't get it, so it must be nonsense.
Exactly.
That is such a stark contrast to the Greeks, who demanded to understand the mechanics of everything perfectly before they would accept anything.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights a profound cosmic reality that the sources touch upon. Human rationality, no matter how sharp or highly trained, is microscopic compared to the vastness of divine wisdom.
Right. Our brains can only hold so much.
The sources actually used the physical universe to make this point. Think about the precise mechanics of our solar system, the exact distance between the Earth and the Sun.
Oh, right. The fine-tuning of it all.
Yeah. If we were just a fraction closer, our oceans would boil. A fraction further away, and we'd freeze into a lifeless rock.
It's terrifying when you think about it.
It is. The sheer mathematical precision required for the cosmos to exist is mind-boggling. So to think that a human brain, working with a few pounds of gray matter, can fully comprehend the mind that authored that cosmic precision, well, it's just arrogant.
Yeah, it's a huge overestimation of ourselves.
The Bereans were noble precisely because they recognized their own limits. They prioritized divine revelation over human intellectual pride.
They understood that they weren't the smartest ones in the room, and they were entirely comfortable with that reality.
Totally comfortable.
So if we synthesize all of this, true nobility, based on these sources, is having an internal compass that is relentlessly pointed towards seeking truth.
Relentlessly.
It's a compass that stays fixed on finding the truth, regardless of what your worldly title is, and regardless of how much your human brain currently understands.
And the fascinating thing about operating with that kind of internal machinery is the real-world ripple effect it creates. Which brings us to the immediate results of this concept in ancient Greece.
Yes, because we have to jump back to Athens for a moment. The story there doesn't end with everyone mocking Paul.
Right, not everyone.
Despite that massive, seemingly impenetrable wall of Greek logic on the Areopagus, the texts note that a few individuals broke rank. Specifically, a member of the Areopagus court named Dionysius and a prominent woman named Damaris.
And we really cannot overstate the significance of Dionysius. He was an elite judge on that very hill.
So he had everything to lose.
He possessed all the worldly status of Thessalonica and all the intellectual pedigree of Athens. But when confronted with the truth, he chose to adopt the every willingness of the Bereans.
Wow.
He laid down his intellectual armor and allowed his curiosity to override his cultural pride.
That's amazing. And then there's Damaris. Our audio transcript source makes a really funny but honestly incredibly insightful observation here.
Oh, about the women converting.
Yes. Throughout all these cities, the ancient texts keep explicitly noting that a significant number of prominent women converted. And the host in our source jokingly speculates about the mechanics of why this might be.
I love this theory.
They suggest that maybe these prominent women were just entirely sick and tired of the men?
Right, sick of the endless circular talking?
Exactly. I mean, imagine living in a culture where the men do absolutely nothing but sit around the marketplace all day, endlessly debating logic, arguing over microscopic philosophical points.
And doing absolutely nothing to actually change reality.
Exactly. The source points out that pure, unyielding rationality wasn't solving the real everyday problems. It wasn't healing their families or bringing them peace.
It was just talk.
Just talk. So when Paul arrived with a message that bypassed the endless academic debate and offered actual spiritual power, these women recognized it immediately. They were drawn to it because they could clearly see that endless intellectual debate was essentially a dead end. They wanted that higher spiritual frequency.
And this raises an important question for you listening right now. When you look at the mechanics of your own life, your own reactions to new information or challenging truths, what is your default setting?
That's a great question to ask.
Are you trapped in the exhausting, endless loop of protecting your own status, like the Thessalonians? Are you demanding absolute laboratory-grade logical proof for every mystery in the universe, like the Athenians?
Which is just exhausting.
Or are you operating on a more noble frequency, one characterized by the open-mindedness and diligent, humble seeking of the Bereans?
That is the ultimate mirror this deep dive holds up to us. So what does this all mean? We've traveled from the status-obsessed violent mobs of Thessalonica, past the breathtaking intellectual arrogance of the Areopagus in Athens, and arrived at the beautiful, open-minded diligence of the Bereans.
Quite a journey.
It is, and the takeaway is remarkably clear. In a modern world that is utterly obsessed with amassing wealth, acquiring titles, and proving you have the smartest, most logical hot take on the internet, true nobility is actually found in humility.
It's the exact inverse of what modern society trains us to value.
It truly is. It's about setting down your pride. It's about opening up your internal compass and engaging with new, sometimes challenging information with every willingness.
Yeah.
It's the quiet dignity of genuinely searching for truth rather than the loud, arrogant demand to always be right.
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. A new way to apply this ancient framework to our modern lives. Throughout these sources, we see a constant contrast between the limits of human logic and the vastness of divine wisdom.
Right.
But let's bring that into the 21st century. What does it mean to be a Berean in the age of the algorithm?
Oh, wow.
Today, our smartphones are essentially a modern-day Areopagus. They're perfectly engineered to feed us endless novelties, outrage, and intellectual echo chambers designed to make us feel like we are the smartest people in the room.
That is so true. It's constant debate.
What if the ultimate application of the Berean mindset isn't just about how we read ancient texts, but how we interact with the endless flood of information in our pockets?
Yeah.
How do we practically apply every willingness when the algorithm is begging us to act like Thessalonian mobs or Athenian scoffers? Is it possible that the absolute highest peak of human reason today isn't outsmarting the internet, but simply having the humility to log off and sit in the mystery?
That is a phenomenal question to carry with us, because when you stop demanding the X-ray of the universe to prove everything to you and instead just follow the pull of an honest, humble curiosity, that's when you finally step into true nobility. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep your minds open, keep your compass pointed toward the truth, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to 3-in-1 Scripture Insight. If this episode inspired you, consider following the podcast and sharing it with others.